Just goes on and on, you know. Either they don't know, don't show.
Released in 1991, Boyz n the Hood hit hard with raw truth, unforgettable characters, and powerful moments that still stick with people today. However, even if you've watched it a bunch of times, there's a lot you probably don't know about what went on behind the scenes. From strange casting choices to real-life twists that sound like movie plots, here are 20 weird and surprising facts about Boyz n the Hood you've probably never heard before. Number 20. John Singleton was just 20 when he directed the film. John Singleton was just 23 years old when he directed Boyz n the Hood, and that alone is wild to think about. Most people at that age are just figuring out life after college, maybe trying to land an entry-level job or still living at home. Singleton, on the other hand, was on a film set in south-central Los Angeles, directing major actors like Lawrence Fishburne and Angela Bassett. He wasn't just working on a movie, he was creating a cultural landmark that would go on to shake up Hollywood and change how black stories were told on screen. What's even more incredible is that this was his first ever feature film. He had just graduated from the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts and wrote the script as part of his film school application. Singleton knew from day one that he didn't just want to write the story. He wanted to direct it, and he didn't back down. When studios offered to buy the script but wanted someone else to direct, he straight up refused. He told them it was his story, and if they liked it, they would have to let him be the one behind the camera. That kind of confidence at 23 is rare, but in Singleton's case, it was backed by talent and a deep connection to the material. He grew up in south-central LA. Everything in the film, the neighborhoods, the tension, the loss, the family dynamics, came from real places in his life. That's why Boyz n the Hood felt so raw and so real. When the film came out, it was a huge deal. Singleton ended up being nominated for Best Director at the Oscars, making him the youngest person ever and the first black director in history to receive that nomination. All at 23. That's legendary. Number 19. The phrase, "Increase the peace." Increase the peace is one of those phrases from Boyz n the Hood that sticks with you. It is not loud or dramatic, but it quietly captures the entire spirit of the film. You can spot it on a t-shirt that Doughboy wears, almost like a silent protest against everything happening around him. In a movie filled with tension, violence, and heartbreak, those three words feel like a small but defiant act of hope. The film did not create the phrase, but Boyz n the Hood gave it a national platform. After the movie came out in 1991, Increase the Peace became more than a fashion statement. It was embraced by youth groups, community leaders, and anti-violence campaigns. People began printing it on shirts and posters, using it in schools and after-school programs. It became part of the cultural language during a time when Los Angeles was dealing with real fear, real loss, and real anger. John Singleton used it deliberately. It was his quiet answer to the chaos, a message tucked into the fabric of the story. While the characters struggled to survive in a broken world, that phrase was a small call for something better. Peace, not revenge. Unity, not war. Number 18. Ice Cube almost didn't get the role of Doughboy. Ice Cube almost didn't land the role of Doughboy in Boyz n the Hood, which is hard to imagine now because his performance is one of the most iconic parts of the entire film. However, in the beginning, it wasn't a sure thing at all. At the time, Ice Cube was known mostly as a rapper. He had already made waves with NWA, but he had never acted in a movie before. John Singleton saw something in him, though. He believed Cube had the right presence and attitude to bring Doughboy to life, so he called him in to audition. The first audition didn't go great. Ice Cube showed up but hadn't memorized the lines. He basically just walked in cold and tried to wing it. For a first-time actor auditioning for a major role, that could have been the end of it. However, Singleton was not the kind of person who made decisions the traditional way. He knew Cube wasn't a trained actor, but he also knew that the energy, the experience, and the voice Cube brought were exactly what the film needed. So instead of crossing him off the list, Singleton gave him another shot. This time, Ice Cube came prepared. He delivered his lines with the raw emotion and edge Singleton had imagined when writing the character. That second audition sealed it. Singleton was convinced, and Ice Cube got the role. The rest is history. Cube's performance as Doughboy was so natural, so emotionally layered, and so grounded in reality that people often forgot he wasn't a trained actor. He brought depth to a character that could have been just another stereotype. Thanks to Singleton's faith and Cube's second chance, Doughboy became one of the most unforgettable characters in black cinema. It almost didn't happen, but it turned out exactly the way it was meant to. Number 17. Cuba Gooding Jr. and Morris Chestnut were the first to show up at auditions. Cuba Gooding Jr. and Morris Chestnut were the very first two actors to show up when auditions started for Boyz and the Hood, and that small detail ended up changing their lives forever. John Singleton was still casting his very first movie, so things weren't flashy or glamorous. There were no massive trailers or studio backlots, just a young director trying to find the right faces to tell a deeply personal story. On that first day, when he opened the doors to begin auditions, Cuba and Morris were literally the first ones in line. That alone might not seem like a big deal, but timing was everything in this case. Singleton didn't just want trained Hollywood actors. He was looking for people who felt real, who could carry the emotional weight of the characters, and who understood the world the film was set in. Cuba Gooding Jr. came in with energy, confidence, and heart. Morris Chestnut had a quiet intensity that fit the role of Ricky perfectly. Singleton later said he felt something almost instantly with both of them. They didn't just read lines, they brought the characters to life in a way that felt honest. Being the first to walk through the door wasn't just luck, it showed they were hungry, they were serious, and Singleton noticed. He believed in trusting his instincts, and something about Cuba and Morris just clicked right away. By the time other actors arrived, Singleton had already found the two young men who would play Trey and Ricky, two of the most important roles in the entire film. It is one of those moments where being early, being prepared, and being real made all the difference. That one morning changed everything for them and helped shape a film that went down in history. Number 16. Lawrence Fishburne was only 6 years older than Cuba Gooding Jr. Lawrence Fishburne was only 6 years older than Cuba Gooding Jr., and yet in Boyz and the Hood, he played his father, Furious Styles. It is one of those casting choices that sounds odd on paper, but works perfectly on screen. Fishburne was around 30 years old at the time, and Cuba was just 24. You would think the age gap would be too small to pull off a convincing father and son relationship, but somehow, it just clicked. A lot of that comes down to how Fishburne carried himself in the role. He had the presence, the wisdom, and the voice of a man who had lived a lot of life and had something serious to teach. Fishburne brought a kind of quiet power to Furious. He didn't play with him the way a typical dad would. He played him like a mentor, a man who had made mistakes and learned from them, and now had a mission to guide his son through a world that could eat him alive. His scenes with Cuba feel real because they are not about lectures. They are about survival, responsibility, and manhood. Even if you did not know the actual age difference between the actors, you could feel the emotional gap between the characters. That is what made it work. John Singleton knew exactly what he was doing when he cast Fishburne. They had worked together before on Pee-wee's Playhouse, and Singleton admired his ability to bring gravity to any role. He was not worried about numbers. He was focused on the energy and dynamic they brought to the screen. The truth is, great acting has nothing to do with age. It is about connection, and the connection between Furious and Trey is one of the strongest father-son portrayals in film, even if, off-camera, they were almost peers. Number 15. Tyra Farrell was only 7 years older than her sons. Tyra Farrell was only 7 years older than her on-screen sons in Boyz and the Hood, which is kind of wild when you really think about it. She played Reva Stiles, Trey's mom, and brought a kind of sharp, grounded strength to the role that made her feel like a fully grown, seasoned woman raising a teenage boy in a tough world. In reality, though, she was only about 30 years old when the film was shot, while Cuba Gooding Jr., who played her son Trey, was around 23. That's just a 7-year gap, but watching the movie you would never guess it. Farrell pulled off the role with such confidence and emotional weight that the age difference didn't matter. She had this natural maturity in her voice, her posture, and her delivery. You believed her as a single mother trying to do right by her son, laying down rules and pushing him to be better than his environment. She didn't play the role like a young woman pretending to be a mom. She played it like someone who had lived through hard choices and wasn't afraid to say the uncomfortable things a parent has to say. This wasn't just good acting. It was a smart casting move by John Singleton. He didn't need someone with years and years between her and Cuba. He needed someone who could bring authority, strength, and depth. Farrell had already made an impression in films like White Men Can't Jump and Jungle Fever, but Boyz n the Hood gave her a role that let her show real emotional range. She might have been close in age to her co-stars, but the way she carried herself on screen made the difference. That's what great actors do. They make you forget the math and believe the moment. Number 14. The film was shot in South Central LA with real locals. Boyz n the Hood was filmed right in the heart of South Central Los Angeles, and that decision is a big part of why the movie feels so real. John Singleton didn't want to create a Hollywood version of the neighborhood he grew up in. He wanted the actual streets, the real energy, the raw look of the place. He wasn't interested in building sets or cleaning things up to make them more polished for the camera. He wanted to show South Central exactly as it was, and that meant filming in the middle of it, with all the risks and unpredictability that came along with that choice. What made it even more powerful was the fact that many of the people you see in the background of the film are real locals. Singleton brought in people from the neighborhood to be extras, and in some cases, even gave them speaking roles. These weren't actors pretending to be part of the community. They were the community. The way they talked, moved, dressed, and reacted was authentic because it came from lived experience. Their presence gave the movie a documentary-like layer of truth that most films never come close to capturing. Filming in South Central wasn't easy. There were real gang territories and genuine safety concerns. Singleton, who was still in his early 20s, made a point to connect with people in the area and earn their trust. Some locals helped advise on wardrobe, slang, and how certain situations would actually play out. They weren't just part of the backdrop. They helped shape the feel of the movie. That kind of authenticity doesn't come from a soundstage or a costume department. It comes from being there, listening, and letting real people be part of telling their own story. Singleton knew that, and that's why Boyz n the Hood still hits so hard. Number 13. Dookie's pacifier was real life. Dookie's pacifier in Boyz n the Hood is one of those small details that sticks in your memory long after the credits roll. It is weird, kind of funny, and totally unexpected, especially in such a heavy film. What makes it even more interesting is that it was not written into the script or created by the costume department. It was something the actor Dedrick D. Gobert actually brought with him from real life. Gobert, who played Dookie, was using the pacifier off-camera as a way to help himself quit smoking. He would keep it in his mouth to fight the cravings and to keep from lighting up between takes. John Singleton noticed it and thought it was such a striking and unusual look that he told Gobert to keep it in for the role. Just like that, the pacifier became part of Dookie's character. It was not planned. It was not symbolic in any deep or philosophical way. It was just a real-life thing that added a strange, almost surreal layer to the character. The result is a perfect example of how unexpected choices can make a movie feel more real and more memorable. Dookie barely has any lines in the film, yet he's remembered. That little pacifier made him stand out in a crowd of characters who all had powerful moments. It made you wonder what his story was, why he had it, what it meant, even if the film never answered those questions. That kind of organic, unforced creativity is part of what made Boyz n the Hood so unique. Singleton was not afraid to adapt on the spot and let the actors bring something personal to their roles. In this case, a pacifier meant to curb a smoking habit ended up becoming an unforgettable piece of movie history. Number 12. The gunshot scenes were filmed without warning. In Boyz n the Hood, the gunshot scenes hit hard. They are loud, sudden, and emotionally jarring. What most people do not know is that part of what made those scenes feel so real is that John Singleton filmed many of them without warning the cast. The actors had no idea exactly when the shots were coming. There was no countdown, no stage direction like "brace for gunfire." Singleton wanted their reactions to be raw, unfiltered, and instinctive, and it worked. When you watch scenes like the one where Ricky gets shot, or any moment where violence explodes into the frame, the shock on the actors' faces is not just acting. It is a genuine response to something unexpected happening on set. Singleton believed that real fear, surprise, and confusion could not be perfectly acted, especially by a cast that included several first-time film actors. He wanted to capture what it felt like to be caught off guard, to feel that sudden shift from normal to chaos, the same way it happens in real life. This technique created an edge to the film that audiences could feel. It helped drive home the reality of growing up in a neighborhood where danger could erupt at any moment. It was not about action or suspense for entertainment. It was about truth. Singleton was trying to show how quick and brutal violence can be, especially when it comes out of nowhere. The unpredictability made every scene heavier, more tense, and more memorable. It also showed how much Singleton trusted his actors to stay in the moment and not break character, even when things got intense. That level of spontaneity was rare in movies at the time, but it gave Boyz n the Hood an emotional punch that still lands decades later. It was bold, it was risky, and it was real. Number 11. Ricky's shooter, Lloyd Avery II, later became a real criminal. One of the most chilling facts about Boyz n the Hood is what happened to the actor who played Ricky's murderer. His name was Lloyd Avery II, and in real life, his story ended in tragedy. In the movie, Avery plays one of the gang members who guns down Ricky in that heartbreaking scene in the alley. It is one of the most emotional and unforgettable moments in the film. However, what makes it even more haunting is what Avery did years later, off camera. After appearing in Boyz n the Hood, Avery had a few more roles in movies like Poetic Justice and Lockdown, but his acting career never fully took off. Instead of building on the momentum from the film, he drifted away from Hollywood and eventually got caught up in the same kind of lifestyle the movie warned about. In the early 2000s, he was arrested and later convicted for a double homicide in Los Angeles. He had shot and murdered 2 people, reportedly in what police described as a random and senseless act of violence. The man who once acted out a murder on screen had now committed one in real life. Avery was sentenced to life in prison and sent to Pelican Bay State Prison, one of the toughest facilities in California. In a bizarre and dark twist, he was murdered in his prison cell in 2005 by his cellmate, who was serving time for armed robbery. His demise was brutal and mysterious, with reports saying his body went undiscovered for hours. It is one of those stories that blurs the line between fiction and reality in the most tragic way. Lloyd Avery II started out acting in a film that aimed to shed light on violence and the cycle of destruction in Black communities. Somehow he ended up becoming a part of the very cycle the movie tried to expose. Number 10. Singleton had a cameo in the film. John Singleton made a small but memorable cameo in Boyz n the Hood, and if you were not looking closely, you might have missed it. He appears briefly as the mailman who delivers Ricky's SAT results. It is a blink and you miss it kind of moment, but knowing it is Singleton adds an extra layer of charm to the scene. Here was a first-time director, just 23 years old, dropping himself into a story that was deeply personal and emotionally charged. It was not just a fun Easter egg. It was a subtle way of placing himself in the world he grew up in, a world he was now sharing with audiences all over the world. Singleton was not an actor, and he never tried to make his cameo anything flashy. He just walks up, hands over the envelope, says a line, and keeps it moving. But the scene itself is huge. Ricky's SAT results represent hope. They represent a possible way out of the environment that has shaped and threatened him since childhood. Singleton choosing to be the one to deliver that moment is meaningful. It is almost symbolic. As a storyteller, he was literally handing his character a chance at something better. Behind the scenes, Singleton was known for his hands-on approach. He was involved in everything, from casting to locations to wardrobe. So it makes sense that he would step in front of the camera too, even for just a few seconds. That brief appearance is a reminder that this was not just another Hollywood movie. It was his vision, his story, his neighborhood, and his truth. He was not just directing from the sidelines, he was living and breathing every part of it. The cameo may be small, but it connects Singleton to the film in a deeply personal and unforgettable way. Number 9. Some characters were based on real people. Some of the characters in Boyz n the Hood were directly inspired by real people John Singleton knew growing up, and that is a big part of why the film feels so honest. This was not a story made up in a Hollywood office by people trying to guess what life in South Central Los Angeles was like. It came straight from experience. Singleton grew up in the neighborhood he was portraying. The people he saw every day, the ones he laughed with, feared, looked up to, or lost, became the foundation for the characters we see on screen. Doughboy, played by Ice Cube, was one of the most emotionally complex characters in the film. Singleton has said that Doughboy was based on someone he knew in his neighborhood. This real person had the same tough exterior and rough upbringing, but underneath it all there was pain and vulnerability. Singleton wanted to show that side, not just the anger or the violence, but the emotional scars that come from growing up in a world that offers very few choices. He gave Doughboy that depth because he had seen it in real life. It was not just imagination, it was memory. Even Trey, the main character played by Cuba Gooding Jr., was largely based on Singleton himself. The structure of Trey's life, being sent to live with his father to get more discipline, navigating school, friends, and danger, reflected Singleton's childhood. Furious Styles, Trey's father, was modeled after Singleton's dad, a man who was present and engaged, trying to raise his son right in the middle of chaos. That is what made Boyz n the Hood so powerful. It was fiction rooted in truth. Singleton did not just write characters, he honored real people. He took their struggles, their personalities, and their realities, and put them on screen for the world to finally see. Number 8. The film had a 20-minute standing ovation at Cannes. When Boyz n the Hood premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1991, no one could have predicted what would happen next. After the final scene faded to black, the audience stood up and began to applaud, and they did not stop. The film received a standing ovation that lasted for 20 minutes. That is an incredibly long time for any film, let alone a debut feature from a 23-year-old first-time director from South Central Los Angeles. The reaction was more than just polite applause. It was loud, emotional, and sustained. People were moved by the raw storytelling, the heartbreak, the humanity, and the truth Singleton brought to the screen. This was not the kind of film Cannes audiences were used to. It was unpolished, emotional, and deeply personal. It did not try to impress with flashy visuals or famous names. It hit people in the heart. That 20-minute ovation helped put Boyz n the Hood on the global map. It signaled that John Singleton was not just a promising young director, he was a force. The film's message about race, violence, and family transcended language and culture. Cannes embraced it, and from that moment on, the world was paying attention. Number 7. The budget was only $6.5 million. The budget for Boyz n the Hood was only $6.5 million, which is shockingly low for a film that made such a huge cultural impact. At the time, most studio films easily cost 2 or 3 times that amount, even for stories with smaller scopes. However, John Singleton knew how to stretch every dollar. He was smart, resourceful, and deeply committed to authenticity. He did not need expensive sets or over-the-top effects. What he needed was truth, and he got it by filming in real neighborhoods, casting lesser-known actors, and relying on the raw power of storytelling. Singleton used local extras, natural lighting, and real locations throughout South Central Los Angeles. He focused on character-driven scenes instead of action-heavy sequences. That approach not only kept costs low, but also gave the movie its documentary-like feel. The performances were strong, the dialogue was sharp, and every frame felt lived in and real. Despite the small budget, the film went on to earn almost $60 million at the box office. That kind of return was unheard of for a directorial debut with such a heavy and personal subject. Number 6. The movie was shot in sequence. Boyz n the Hood was shot in sequence, which is a rare choice in filmmaking. Most movies are filmed out of order based on location, actor availability, and scheduling efficiency. However, John Singleton, being a first-time director and deeply connected to the story, decided to shoot the film from beginning to end just as the audience would see it. This approach helped the cast stay emotionally in sync with their characters' journeys. For the actors, especially those who were new to film, like Cuba Gooding Jr. and Morris Chestnut, shooting in order made it easier to build their performances naturally. They were able to experience the growth, tension, and heartbreak of the story in real time. It gave them a chance to develop chemistry and emotional depth as the film progressed. When it came time to shoot the more intense scenes, like Ricky's demise or Doughboy's reflection at the end, the cast had already lived through the story's events and could draw on that build-up. Singleton believed in keeping things real, and shooting in sequence helped create that emotional truth. It allowed the characters to evolve organically on screen. The result was a film that felt deeply authentic, like life unfolding moment by moment, just as it does in reality. Number 5. Regina King was considered for a role. Before Regina King became an Oscar-winning powerhouse and one of Hollywood's most respected directors, she was a rising young talent fresh off her role in the sitcom 227. Around the time John Singleton was casting Boyz n the Hood, her name was definitely in the mix. Singleton knew about her, and she was already building a reputation as someone who could bring both strength and vulnerability to the screen. It made perfect sense that she would be considered. However, for reasons that were never made entirely public, Regina King did not end up in the final cast. Some say scheduling played a part. Others suggest Singleton had a very specific vision for each character and was saving her for something special, and he did just that. 2 years later, she appeared in Poetic Justice alongside Janet Jackson and Tupac Shakur, delivering the kind of raw, unforgettable performance that Singleton was known for pulling from his actors. It is interesting to imagine what Boyz n the Hood might have felt like with her in it. She had the energy, the edge, and the authenticity that fit right into Singleton's world. Even though she was not in the film, her presence was felt just around the corner, waiting for her moment. Number 4. Angela Bassett filmed all of her scenes in just 1 week. Angela Bassett brought a quiet strength and fierce intelligence to Boyz n the Hood, even though she was only on screen for a small portion of the film. What many people do not know is that she filmed all of her scenes in just 1 week. That is right. In only 7 days, she crafted a character that left a lasting impression. Reva Stiles, Trey's mother, was sharp, no-nonsense, and full of love, but not the soft kind. Her love was the kind that pushed her son to be better, to rise above his environment, and to think for himself. John Singleton knew exactly what he was doing when he cast Bassett. She had not yet become the icon we know today, but even then she could command attention with just a glance or a single line. Due to the film's tight budget and shooting schedule, Bassett came in, delivered her powerful scenes, and was gone in a flash. Yet her presence is unforgettable. Number 3. Nia Long almost didn't audition. Nia Long almost didn't audition for Boyz n the Hood, and the reason had everything to do with how close the story hit home. She grew up in South Central Los Angeles, the same area where the film takes place, and when she first read the script, it felt too real. It was not just a role to her, it was a reflection of the life she knew, the people she grew up around, and the struggles she had seen firsthand. That kind of closeness made her hesitate. She questioned whether she could emotionally handle stepping into a character who lived a life so similar to her own. At the time, Nia was a young actress still building her career, and like anyone in that position, she knew the importance of choosing the right roles, but this one felt different. It was personal in a way most projects are not. Luckily, her hesitation did not last. She decided to go for it and auditioned for the role of Brandy, Trey's love interest. John Singleton saw something in her that was genuine, grounded, and full of quiet strength. That decision changed her career. Her performance helped introduce her to a wider audience and became one of her most memorable early roles. Number 2. Morris Chestnut had never acted in a movie before. When Morris Chestnut landed the role of Ricky in Boyz n the Hood, he had never acted in a movie before. It was his very first film role ever, and what a debut it turned out to be. Before this, Chestnut had only done a few small television appearances, nothing major, and certainly nothing that hinted he was about to step into one of the most heartbreaking and unforgettable roles in black cinema. John Singleton saw something in him during auditions. Chestnut had a natural presence, a quiet confidence, and a kind of vulnerability that fit the character perfectly. Ricky was more than just a high school football player with college dreams. He was a symbol of hope, a young black man trying to make it out of a difficult environment by staying focused and doing the right thing. That made his demise in the film even more devastating. It was not just another tragic moment. It felt personal. Despite his inexperience, Chestnut delivered a performance that was both grounded and deeply emotional. He played Ricky with sincerity, never overacting or trying too hard. His natural instincts made the character real. That first role launched his career and proved that sometimes all it takes is one opportunity to change everything. Number 1. The film was added to the National Film Registry. In the year 2002, Boyz n the Hood was officially added to the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. That is not just a nice honor or a pat on the back. It means the film was recognized as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant to American society. Only a select number of films are chosen for this list each year, and once they are in, they are preserved forever as part of the country's official cinematic history. For a film that began as the vision of a 23-year-old first-time director from South Central Los Angeles, this was monumental. What makes this even more meaningful is what the National Film Registry actually represents. It is not about box office numbers or flashy awards. It is about impact. It is about how a film captures a piece of American life that might otherwise be forgotten. Boyz n the Hood did exactly that. It told a story that Hollywood had long ignored. It showed the reality of life for young black men growing up in neighborhoods shaped by systemic violence, poverty, and limited opportunity. The inclusion in the registry was also a recognition of John Singleton's bold voice. He was the youngest and the first African American nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards. His debut film was now being honored as an essential part of American culture. That is the power of storytelling. Singleton gave the world a film that was personal, powerful, and unforgettable. The fact that it now lives in the Library of Congress means that future generations will have access to it, study it, and learn from it. It is no longer just a film. It is a preserved piece of history. Which of these facts did you know before now? Let us know in the comments. For more interesting facts about your favorite movies, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.